Please note that any comments posted on the chat feed of the Council's YouTube channel during the recording of the meeting will not be monitored by the Council. All members have been provided with the remote committee guidance note prior to the meeting. Please can these be adhered to, and remember the points that are including all mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Please switch your profile to mute unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak, just please indicate by showing your hand on screen. I will make a note as we go through who wish to speak on each particular item. And for each item, the officers will present the report and the committee will discuss it, after which, if there are any group leaders or deputy group leaders present or any other members, they'll be asked if they have any comments they wish to make. Thank you. Item number 1, apologies for absence.
There are no apologies for absence. Thank you.
Item number 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from anybody? No. Thank you. Item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting being held on the 26th of November, which is on pages 3 to page 10 of your agenda. Any comments on the minutes? In which case, can I ask councillors to unmute themselves and we'll vote on the minutes. I'll be voting in favour. Councillor Fellows.
Sorry about that. I had difficulty with. I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer.
Favour.
Councillor Reid.
In favour.
Councillor Turner.
In favour.
Thank you. That is unanimous. Item number 4, the work programme, which is on pages 11 to 13 of your agenda. Any comments on the work programme? Councillor Rimmer.
Yeah, a few residents have actually been asking about the local plan and the questions that the inspector has actually asked. And I appreciate that my fellow colleague, Councillor Moore, has actually written and asked about this as well. But it does seem like an omission that we're not actually covering this as part of this work programme in some way. It was really to bring that to this committee's attention to see what we could do about that.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Before I invite Ms Lyons to come in here, members will be aware that at full council I gave an update on the questions that the inspector had asked and the deadline by the end of the month that we have to submit the responses to the questions that have been raised. Under the planning committee meeting that took place in October 2018, both myself and the head of planning have delegated authority by the committee to respond on behalf of the council to those questions that have been asked. Ms Lyons, is there anything that you'd like to add on to that?
I mean, from our perspective, there is nothing. So if we are creating anything new, which we obviously can't do, if we're addenduming any documents which we think provide new evidence to the plan, that will have to come in front of the committee. But we can't create anything new. So therefore, what we're doing at the moment is just reiterating the points that have come through the evidence already put in front of the inspector, and that's what he's asked us to do. The questions are, where is this information in the plan and all the evidence you've submitted? Bring it to my attention. So all that information is actually within the plan itself already. So there's nothing of those questions he's asked us. He's not asked us anything that we're not creating any new information. As we set out in the work plan, when we look at modifications to the plan and everything, that will come back to this committee for this committee to look at. So that's why that minute was put in, because that's where we are at the moment. We can't be challenging the content of the plan itself because the plan itself has been submitted along with that evidence. Is that correct, Philip?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We need to focus on the process of the examination and not unnecessarily raise issues again when they've been agreed for the submitted plan.
Thank you, Ms Lyons. Mr. Barlow. Councillor Rimmer, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, absolutely. That's very helpful, thank you, to know that there won't be any sort of modifications taking place of the existing policies, and that is a reiteration. What might still be useful is if we could have, once the answers have been given even, a walkthrough to just say how matters have been dealt with, even if it's a verbal report of some description, just so we are kept informed of that. And I don't know, and also the next steps in the process, and whether there's an element of ping pong between ourselves and the inspector when this is being examined as well, and what sort of stages where we would expect it to be to get to a point where it's adopted. I'm also, you know, in my ward, we've got Bowes Gifford Parish Council who are doing sort of great work in terms of putting their neighbourhood plan together as well. So it's obviously they're waiting for this whole process to unfold, and I'm hearing from residents from Bowes Gifford about the neighbourhood plan, and I'm hearing from residents from outside of Bowes Gifford about the local plan, and everybody's quite keen to know. And I know people watch these meetings and like to know what's going on, they'll tune in. So it is a good way of actually showing the public that we are actually what we're doing in response as well, and talking their councillors and them through the process.
Thank you.
Councillor Mimmer, sorry, Ferguson, there isn't like a ping pong with the inspector. It's all very formal with the inspector. So what we get is we've had this initial questions, and a response will go back to the initial questions, and those initial question responses will be on the website and they can be viewed by everybody. So there's nothing behind closed doors that happens now. Everything is in the open. So, and what we'll then get back from, if the inspector needs any further information, he will set us some more questions to answer, which will go up on the website and which we will formally respond to that way. So everything now is very formal and very, very transparent, and we'll be pointing everyone to that. So the point that we will make sure that we use the members bulletin to make every member aware of where we are. So again, it's using already the devices we've got in place to notify members of the positions. If there's a need to bring anything back to this committee, we will be, but the officers, there is only a very small team dealing with the plan, and it's basically trying to do what we have to do in the plan to get the plan moving forward against what we bring back to the committee, which you won't have, because the evidence is already there. It's not as if you can make additional comments for that evidence. So that's where we've got to is the fact that it will be basically, it's all formal, it's all transparent, it all goes on the website. Every answer we make will go on the website for you to review, for you to have a look at.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Christine. No, that makes sense in terms of the transparency, absolutely. I'm just wondering, obviously, with what we did last time in respect of education, and looked at it, and it was an educational piece in itself. I'm just thinking that I'd sort of talk through on any answers and where it's at, as well as the information that's gone up on the website, not for us to modify, not for us to add comments, but more of a case of having not even scrutiny, but actually adding and amplifying the transparency.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. I think the point you've made has been well heard tonight, and certainly the response back from Ms. Lyons, hopefully, and as it should do, give indication as to how clear and transparent we are being with the information. And I will, and I'm more than happy to take the points that you've raised up further with officers following this meeting. So if there is no further comments on the work programme,
Councillor Moore has his hand raised.
Sorry, Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you. I'm a little bit disappointed that again we have a work programme that's all TBE, and the next meeting for the committee is the 18th of March, but everything's TBE, so we have no idea what that's likely to contain. What is something that's missing on there is the neighbourhood plan update as per minute 792, which is on page 7, which we agreed last time would be included on the work programme. And secondly, will the council be responding to the government consultation announced on the 16th of January, the right to regenerate, reform of the right to contest? That consultation closes on the 13th of March, which is before our next committee meeting. So I would be grateful if we could have some indication, A, is the council going to respond to that consultation, and how is the committee going to be informed of that response?
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Ms Lyons?
So in terms of the neighbourhood plan report, that we had an issue with that, Councillor Moore, over the funding for that. So there was a discrepancy between ourselves and finance over the £50,000 and where that was going to come from. We have found it now. Initially, it was so the report was pulled because we didn't have agreement on where that financial where the pot of money was. Now it's been found. That will come to the March committee. So it was basically pulled for that reason, because we didn't want to give you false information about that. In terms of that recent consultation, Philip, have you got any update on that?
Well, obviously on the agenda tonight, we've got a major consultation that needs to be responded to fairly soon, but I'm not sure what consultation is being referred to. So I don't know, Robert, are you aware of another consultation?
No, I'm not aware of the particular one, but we can we could have a look tomorrow perhaps, and then see what we would need to do about it, because it might be that it's a joint piece of work where we would need input from other service areas.
Yeah, we'll have a look.
Thank you, officers, on both those points. On the neighbour plan funding, just to calm any fears, that funding is there, and that we'll be progressing that at the earliest opportunity at the March meeting. And on responses to consultations, if we need to arrange more meetings, we will arrange more meetings to ensure the committee has oversight before the consultation responses are sent off. So I'll now proceed to the vote on the work programme. So if I could ask members to unmute themselves, I'll be voting in favour. Councillor Fellows?
In favour.
Councillor Reid?
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer?
Abstain.
Councillor Moore?
Against.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, I'll be against as well, Chairman.
Thank you. So with 3 votes in favour, 2 against and 1 abstention, the work programme is passed. So we now proceed on to agenda item number 5, the statement of community involvement addendum for the South Essex plan on pages 15 to 76 of your agenda. And I believe I'm handing over to Miss Adeloa.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. The committee is being asked tonight to consider the statement of community involvement (SCI) addendum for the South Essex plan. The SCI is a statement of local planning authority's policy on how it will involve its local community and stakeholders in the statutory planning process affecting their area. Basildon Council's latest SCI was adopted in October 2020. As part of the ongoing work on the South Essex plan, a SCI addendum for the South Essex plan has been produced jointly by the South Essex authorities. This addendum covers the South Essex plan only and will establish a consistent consultation approach across the sub-region. A joint public consultation was launched on a draft of the SCI addendum between December 2019 and January 2020 for a period of 6 weeks. The consultation followed best practice guidelines as well as each authority's policy requirements. At the end of the six-week consultation period, comments were received from 48 contributing consultees across the sub-region on various sections of the SCI. A full breakdown of the representations received are set out on pages 23 to 71 of the agenda reports pack. Having regard to the consultation procedure and the consideration of the matters raised through the consultation, it is recommended that committee approves the SCI addendum for the South Essex Plan and refer this to full council for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adeloa. Can I invite any member who wishes to speak on this item, please? Councillor Moore.
Yes, I must say that I do find it ill-advised to hold consultations with the public over the Christmas period. So you've got a 6-week consultation period and you could effectively take a week out of that because people are, under normal circumstances, are enjoying themselves, maybe not quite in last December. And I assume that the 48 responses are in total across all the local authorities of South East Essex. If that's the case, that's 46 responses out of nigh on 1 million people. So it does seem a very, very low response rate and then we're going to make an assumption that everyone agreed with it because 48 people did. So I'm disappointed at that. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Ms. Adeloa, just to clarify that the consultation was taking place in December 2019 to January 2020, so the year previously, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The consultation for the SCI, there is no legal requirement for a consultation period, but as best practice, most authorities will go for a 4-week consultation period. So we took account of the fact that it was a consultation during the Christmas period and we had 2 weeks to that time period, hence the 6-week consultation.
Thank you, Ms. Adeloa. Sorry, go on.
In terms of the second question, yes, the response rate was quite low and it's similar to what you find for this kind of consultation across the country. Bearing in mind that Basildon Council's SCI that was consulted on a few last year, we only had about 19 responses as well. So the response rate is quite low and I do agree that could be a better way to do it. But unfortunately, I think there's a bit of consultation fatigue out there and people kind of choose what they respond to in this regard.
Thank you, Ms. Adeloa. Councillor Turner. Sorry, Councillor Turner, you're on mute.
Some would say they prefer it that way. I sort of agree with Richard on this. The consultation looks like a waste of time, and accept what the officer's saying about responses are normally low anyway. But I think we obviously don't go into a consultation with that in mind. We go in to try and encourage and find out the best ways to or get the opportunity to encourage people to respond back. And 48, you might as well consign this to the bin because there is very little, if nothing at all, that you can get from it. I had a look through some of the responses and the whole thing looks very, very thin, very thin. So I'm just wondering what use that document is going to be. And then the question arises is, well, given the times we're in, do we go back out for another consultation? Is there time? Presumably not. It's all getting a bit late in the day. And like you say, we had consultation was over the winter period 1920. So we would have had time perhaps at the beginning of last year, but that all got weighed down. So the whole thing looks a bit sad, really, in retrospect. So I don't think I'm going to be finding myself voting for this because I think we've missed the opportunity. And it really comes down to this, the work of council, councillors, and what we do all this stuff for. We've gone out on a consultation for 4 weeks, good or bad, and we've got absolutely pretty much zilch for it. So bit sad at that lost opportunity, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Just before I bring you in, Councillor Rimmer, and I take the points on board about the number of people that responded to the consultation and the time period that this was undertaken. Ms. Adelowo, would you just be able to give us an update on the other local authorities and where they are with approving the statement of community involvement?
Yes. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure I could confirm, but a couple of authorities have already adopted the SCI. And I'm also aware that it's gone onto the web page for the South Essex plan, so it's already a public document in any case. And
thank you.
We would, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Adler. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Councillor Rimmer.
I'm actually more, I mean, yes, I understand what my fellow councillors are saying in respect to the actual number. And looking at some of the responses we've received, they're quite detailed about what they're saying. My concern is there's no analysis of this for us to actually understand what's being said by the consultants. We're expected to read through every single comment and come to our own analysis. Well, I'm not a research professional. And actually, what it would have been actually useful to have actually seen is some sort of tabulation of what are the most common concerns, how, and some sort of tabulation from us to say how we think they are mitigated or not, whether they're valid or not, and an analysis of actually how positive or negative people were in respect to this. But we don't have that. All we're being presented with is raw qualitative data. And I actually find that not very impactful in terms of actually understanding the responses from the consultation. This isn't a proper consultation outcome. This isn't a proper analysis in terms of research. And that's why I would be voting against this, because I think there's another step here. I don't think we've got a finished product that we can actually comprehend and make sense of. And we as councillors, democratically representing our wards across the borough, we've got a duty to understand what are the people who have taken a time out over Christmas have come back and written.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Before I invite Ms. Sadler to come back in, I would just draw your attention to the document that does include the council's response to those points and provide some clarity on the points that the residents have brought to our attention. Ms. Sadler, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yes. Looking at the comments, most of them raised issues that were outside of that the SCI couldn't address. So in as much as it looks a bit detailed, a lot of them were raising issues about growth options and where growth locations would be, which is outside the remit of the SCI. The changes that we've made to the SCI document really relate to wording changes and clarity. There's nothing, none of the responses would raise anything particularly significant in terms of the SCI document itself. So was it, in as much as we did have detailed comments, not a lot of those comments would have affected what was contained in the SCI.
Thank you, Ms. Adler. Councillor Rimmer?
Yeah, I've seen the column saying council response, but it's actually how you weigh it up, how you analyse it, how many people are actually saying particular comments are out of scope, how many people are actually making comments in scope, where comments in scope have actually been made, what is our analysis of those, what's our reaction to those. I find it disappointing. I'm sorry, I really do. I mean, because I feel like this is a raw product that needs actually to be finished, that we need that analysis to actually say these are the findings of the consultation, even if it was like 2 pages to say these are the findings of the consultation. Out of the 48 respondents, 36 said comments which were out of scope, 12 said comments which were in scope. The 12 that said comments were in scope concentrated on these particular areas. we accept some of the comments in this way and we'll change the document. We don't accept these comments for such and such a reason. And I feel that gives the people who've responded, who've given their time to do that, the respect that it deserves.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. What I would say is that provided the committee approves this evening, it then goes to full council in March for approval and adoption by the council. And during that time, I'm happy to take up those points with officers to discuss further. Okay, we'll now proceed to the vote on page 16. I'll take all three
Did Councillor
recommendations.
Reid put a hand up, sorry, to ask a question?
Sorry, Councillor Reid, sorry, I couldn't see that. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer and Chair. Just a very simple question. Well, I think it's quite simple. How many people would we normally expect to respond to something like this? Being fairly new to all of this, what would we consider to be a reasonable amount of responses?
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Ms. Adelola? Yep.
There isn't, I wouldn't know about a national average, but judging from the consultations on SCI that we've had in Basildon, the rate is usually low. We've had as little as about under 10 comments, and the last one was just 19 consultees that responded. So it's usually a fairly low response rate.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, just generally, we have in the past, and I think a lot of the opinion polls work on no less than 1,000 to get anything meaningful. Now, I'm not suggesting that, you know, on a consultation like this, we might get 1,000, but it just comes back to the question about what you're doing the consultation for. And as Councillor Rimmer said, the evaluation to quantify it, you know, what are we actually getting from it, and what do we make of it? And that's the bit really that you question, because on the basis of this, presumably we're going to full council to make a recommendation or vote on a recommendation and make something of it. And clearly 48 votes, it's just not there.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. We will now proceed to the vote on on the recommendation listed on page 16, and I'll take all three recommendations en bloc. That we approve the Statement of Community Involvement addendum to the South Essex Plan. I'll be voting in favour. Councillor Fellows. Councillor Fellows.
Sorry, you froze a chair.
You froze again.
Did you all hear me go to the recommendation?
No, we heard you. I think it was Derek who was freezing. Sorry.
Sorry. Councillor Fellows, can you do a thumbs up if you're voting in favour, or a thumbs down if you're voting against? I'll accept that as a vote in favour. Councillor Rimmer.
Against, and
Councillor
purely because the way it's tabulated, evaluated, etc.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
In favour.
Councillor Moore.
Against.
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, I'll be against.
So that's 3 votes in favour, 3 votes against, and with my casting vote, that is carried. So we proceed on to agenda item number 6, supporting housing delivery and
Sorry,
public.
Chair.
Councillor Rimmer.
And we have your assurance that a better document will go to full council.
As I said during the debate, I will work with officers in between now and the March full council meeting, when this comes to full council, to present the report. I hope will carry the support of all 42 members of this council. We'll now proceed on to agenda item number 6, supporting housing delivery and public service infrastructure, on pages 77 to 94. As Mr. Davey referred to earlier, this is a consultation that the government announced just before the Christmas break, and seeks to reclassify and create a new class of commercial service and business property to Class E, and seek to extend the permitted development rights to those properties. Something that I have some significant concerns over, which is outlined within this report, and I'll now invite Mr. Davey to present the report.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Good evening, members. So this consultation follows on from the earlier consultations last summer and the government's introduction of Class E back in September. They did say at the time that there will be further changes pending, and although the timing of this one was not ideal, I think it really took people by surprise, given that obviously it will take time for the full impact of Class E to actually filter through into planning application and monitoring data. So what's proposed in this consultation, really the main thrust of it was, as Councillor Ferguson has just said, that there will be a proposed permitted development right which would enable any building which was in a Class E use on the date of its implementation, the 1st of September 2020, and that would be able to convert to residential use under permitted development rights. Now, this, of course, is it's very interesting, but it would, if it's carried, it would fundamentally change the way that the planning system works, because any Class E, of course, itself covers commercial, services and business uses. The paper talks, it provides a justification which is linked to the downturn on the high street and the difficult period that the retail sector is currently facing as a consequence of changing consumer behaviour, and that the structural changes, including more online shopping, mean that it's likely that retailers will require less floor space going forwards, and that because of a number of high street names struggling or have already ceased trading, resulting in vacant premises, there's simply a lot of floor space going begging, really. And the odd thing is that then the paper makes it clear later on that the permitted development right would in fact apply to every single retail park, business park, gym, creche, GP surgery or light industrial unit across England, which was in existence and inherited that Class E right. Yet the justification is constrained to town centres, and no evidence is provided at all to justify why the right would be needed outside of main town centres. It also doesn't give a complete picture because, again, there are certain market research companies who are really drilling into these matters in detail. And there's certainly the consultants who have been hired for an Essex-wide project have also uncovered that although a lot of town centres have suffered from a huge reduction in footfall and consumer spend, what's happening is that a greater number of people are actually shopping locally as a consequence of this. So whereas people used to commute into town and city centres for work, and they'll be spending money in those town and city centres, they now spend it in their local neighbourhood. So this is an important distinction because, of course, then you would potentially harm some of the smaller parades by simply depriving them of revenue. Obviously, COVID lockdowns have seen people spending more time at home as well. And the consultation itself recognises that not all buildings will be suitable for conversion to housing, which again somewhat undermines the government's own rationale for introducing Class E. Now, clearly there's a risk that this permitted development right would therefore result in the conversion of buildings in locations that would be wholly inappropriate for housing. There's also the impact of the loss of employment generating buildings. What that means in terms of job creation going forward, again, is far from clear. So although retail companies may sadly close down, they are job generating developments. Now, clearly the footfall in the town centres has been impacted by the COVID lockdowns and the closure of non-essential retail. Again, what will happen when those restrictions do fade away? And when that will happen, of course, is another debate altogether. But there's certainly no evidence to suggest that people have given up on shopping and everyone's happy sitting around at home ordering goods on websites. Also, of course, the right may see the creation of a handful of temporary jobs while the buildings are physically undergoing conversion to residential. But again, what will happen after that? Another important clarification to note there is that the government's own research on permitted development rights last July, that also that was based on a case study of 11 different areas in the UK, and that report also then found that permitted development was effectively uneconomical in some areas. Developers are more attracted to London than South East because of the higher land values, and that's the only place where the profits can be made. There was a recent article in the Financial Times which mentioned Basildon. It was published on the 4th of December. I'm not sure if any of you saw that, but this same point was actually made by the director of a prominent town centre regeneration consultancy. And again, he noted that the average cost of converting floor space to residential is around £200–250 per square foot. Of course, therefore, in areas where the sale price of units would be much lower, effectively, these sorts of conversions will be unviable. So therefore, there's no point in the government introducing an automatic right, because in many areas of the country, the viability impacts would mean that an alternative route to planning consent would be favourable for developers. So moving into some of the specifics really on this proposal. As a starting point, we would need to understand what is being proposed for introduction. So we know there's a permitted development right. No formal threshold is set. However, the paragraph 17 of the document does note that the requirement for environmental impact assessment only applies where proposals will deliver 150 units or more. So it could be the case that the government is suggesting that the permitted development right should apply to developments of up to 150 homes. This will be consistent with one of their proposals in the changes to the current planning system consultation last year, as they proposed that permission in principle should apply to schemes up to the environmental impact assessment threshold. What would happen then, of course, is that a scheme of such a size would start to explore some of the same overlaps and the same blurring of boundaries then, which we mentioned in response to that particular consultation. Because typically under the prior approval route, the range of issues that are considered by a case officer is limited to addressing matters such as the transport impacts, flood risk, and the design and the external appearance of a scheme. Now, another thing to note here would be that the tranche of permitted development rights that were introduced last year also would enable 2 additional stories to be added under permitted development on top of a newly converted donor building. So whatever the height and however many units are then converted are then realised via the conversion of a building, you could then add a permitted development right on top of that for further units. And of course, this is problematic then because of the lack of Section 106 and the impacts of the lack of infrastructure then, particularly as in terms of affordable housing. And therefore, the list of prior approval matters within the consultation doesn't really go far enough, because one of the key issues here, because you can PD on top of a PD, if that makes sense, is that while the principle of a residential use might be acceptable in a particular given location, the quantum certainly may not be appropriate if the PD right will enable up to 150 homes to be developed. So we're thinking then about the matters that are typically covered by a planning application, and also the distance from shops and facilities, transport connections, and so on. This is particularly important if the donor building is in an area which is not well served by public transport. So again, there certainly could be a number of technical matters that need to be considered. And again, the amount of time that it would take to do so may then mean that it's better for a developer to pursue an alternative route and perhaps even a full planning application. So this really continues with the trade-off between speed and quality, and the government not really recognising that it doesn't have to be a binary choice. They have also proposed formally, in fact they confirmed that the homes delivered under permitted development should comply with space standards from April next year. The statutory instrument 2020-1243 has confirmed that, and that will come into play from the 6th of April. So that's good. But then again, the problem is that the space standards now don't really recognise the world that we live in, with more people working at home because of COVID. The space standards were introduced in 2015. But of course, the other problem is that does nothing in respect of other wider matters. So the key issues are things like ventilation. It's non-planning matters, but again, there's the associated risk of excess moisture and mould, and there's a growing body of evidence about the impacts of permitted development housing and health. It's again, as a proposal, it's not clear why the government only would look at assessing the impact of the loss of a retail unit in a conservation area. So again, subtly, this continues with the point made a few moments ago, really, that do they perceive that retail is therefore no longer important outside of a conservation area, which, if that's the case, is somewhat lacking in planning logic, really. I don't know why they would come to that conclusion. But then there would also be a need to ensure that matters such as the agent of change principle is fully addressed, and the impacts of the noise coming from existing surrounding uses has also got to be recognised, particularly if you're dealing with development in a town centre. There could be bars or nightclubs underneath or next door. Moving on, I think again it's quite clear that we need to push, that is all we can do, for the government to recognise the need for Section 106 rules to apply to proposals delivered via permitted development. It's not clear how many homes the government intend should be developed from permitted development, not just in Basildon or Essex, but around the country. But clearly they do anticipate that a greater proportion of homes will be delivered down this route. Of course, infrastructure contributions are not mere red tape that can be forgotten about. If the developers don't make the necessary provision, who will do? It increases the pressure on the government itself to do that. It's not apparent they've recognised that. But also, then again, things like school places, again, there are potentially going to be big funding gaps there. The MHCLG have got some initiatives such as the High Street Fund, but that's modus operandi is to renew and reshape town centres and high streets in a way that improves the experience, creates jobs and ensures future sustainability. It's not clear how this permitted development right, which of course would apply to any Class E building, would then support these aims. That doesn't make a great deal of sense. But then again, it raises real questions in terms of who would be undertaking the jobs when the buildings are being converted. Section 106 has key criteria which will allow contributions towards employment and skills, of course, and these can include local labour clauses. So they can be of benefit to groups such as NEETs, younger people who are not in employment or education. Again, unemployed people, college students. So people are potentially then being deprived of an opportunity to get some practical work experience from this proposal. And again, the knock-on effects of that could be quite significant. It's also not clear as to whether the right would apply to buildings, whether they're vacant or not. And that's also important, because if it applies to anything and the premises can still be occupied, there is a real incentive for landlords there to look at just simply changing the use to residential, because it will be more profitable for them to do so. Whereas ideally, in a planning context, we would want the units to, we would at least want to ensure that the possibility of commercial use being retained has been explored. And if leases can be terminated early, of course, there's a risk then that the PD right could see perfectly viable businesses being forced to cease trading. At present, of course, the landlord may want to, they may want to change the the use. They may want to put a planning application in, but a company will be able to find alternative premises. At this moment, if this PD right is to come into force, then potentially anything that's in Class E would be at risk of loss. And it's not apparent why the government would then want to lose the tax receipts and risk further unnecessary employment, given that over 800,000 jobs have been lost since COVID-19 started. And as we say, the route of potentially getting younger people some practical work experience would then be closed down, as Section 106 doesn't apply to permitted development rights. It's not clear what's changed from the language of the housing white paper either, where the government talked of planning for the right homes in the right places, making sure that enough land is released, that the best possible use is made of land, and that local communities have more control over where the development goes and what it looks like. Because again, the scope for people to actually object to prior approvals is very limited. Very technical points. It's also not really clear how councils could actually meet our objectively assessed needs going forward for housing, retail, and employment, floor space in particular, because this permitted development right would then remove one of the basic tenets by which the development control process can control these needs. There will be no way of knowing when a development, a Class E building may change the use until a prior notification is received on the case officer's desk. But in terms of land allocation, yeah, at any point something is built out, the use could change. And this is, I think this is also important because we see the way that things are going, casting our minds back to last year's white paper consultation, and given its proposal then for users to be granted permission in particular uses, in particular zones as a default situation. Because a rule such as this actually fundamentally would change the way that it would effectively reset the planning system and start again. And there's a real danger here that local authorities lose the ability to control and to refuse poor quality schemes. And yeah, it's really unclear how we would know how if we had enough land and sites for retail, office or commercial uses then, because even if we did that through an evidence study, again, at any point, if demand is low, the developers would then be able to submit a prior notification and change the use of the premises. So yeah, it's in summary, it's not a very good proposal. There's a lack of evidence underneath it. We clearly don't support it at all. It disadvantages local authorities. It undermines local evidence bases and policies, but potentially it will disadvantage businesses as well, and communities, because there's certainly less scope for people to object to proposals. I think the government really would need to ensure that they liaise with a reputable data analysis company to gain a complete picture of what's going on the high street right now. It's not clear how enabling the conversion of buildings to housing would actually encourage economic growth. Potentially there's a conflict there with regard to town centre management strategies, initiatives to regenerate town centres, because the permitted development right is likely to result in the removal of a significant number of units in the former A and B classes in particular from the built stock. And beyond the introduction of Article 4s, it's unclear how the right could be restricted or removed, but these can take a significant amount of time to prepare. But crucially, it's already been confirmed by solicitors that local authorities can't start to prepare these directions now because the rule hasn't yet come into force. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davey, for your incredibly detailed presentation and the presents presents the worrying proposals that we see in front of us. Members, I have got you all indicating, so we'll bring you all in. So I'll invite members to come in now, and I'll ask Councillor Fellows. I have Councillor Fellows, Councillor Reid, Councillor Rimmer, Councillor Moore, and Councillor Turner.
Yeah, and I was really impressed with this report before introducing it. I studied it in depth, and mainly to make it clear to the viewing public. My understanding, and the officers, please correct me, with this proposal, as you said, any building that was Class E as of the 1st of September 2020, doesn't matter where it is, it could be on an industrial estate or a trading estate. Under these proposals, homes could be put in there, and in case the public doesn't realise, the S106 and the community infrastructure levy, they are charges that the developers would have to contribute towards infrastructure, which could be roads, it could be education, it could be doctors' surgeries, and a raft of other things. So there we have the ability for a developer to change a warehouse in the middle of nowhere, no attribution towards transport, because as I said, it's in the middle of nowhere. I think this is a ridiculous proposal. It leaves more questions on the table than it tries to answer. I'm really scared of this, and I can see our borough and many other boroughs changing out of all recognition, not for the benefit of the general public. And as I say, I commend the officers, and I would certainly go with their proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Mr. David, you wish to come back and confirm the points that Councillor Fellows has raised there?
That's all correct. The exemption from Section 106 is something that really has to stop. It is the only way to ensure that the necessary school places are provided. Again, if buildings are changed and they are in very inaccessible locations, there will be, of course, access points will be needed. Roads may need to be created, additional access, public transport, everything really. And it's the situation is that because of the current exemption from Section 106, and there's been no scope about Section 106 or still applying to these types of proposals, where will the money come from for such things? And that is the fundamental problem.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. I couldn't agree any more with the points that you've raised, and the points that the Councillor Fellows raised on just how scary the picture could be of significant developments without infrastructure and without any support for that infrastructure that will have a significant impact on our borough. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. There's no way I can support this proposal either. There are just so many things wrong with it. And one thing, which is on page 93, it states that affordable housing cannot be secured from PD developments, and the council has very little control or influence over the private rented sector. I find that extremely worrying that we've got, you know, we can't secure any affordable housing within these. And the other thing I was going to also raise was the 106, which is the main money used for infrastructure, but Councillor Fellows has done that. So I won't repeat what he said. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Rimmer.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading as well as listening, multitasking. I'm not too sure, to be honest with you. I mean, I think there's a need for balance in any sort of response that we give, and to respect the political divides that exist within this council. We're representing the views of the council. And I actually think we've gone too negative on this on the whole. The government itself is very good at consulting, as governments of all stripes and colour have been very good in this country at consulting people and getting their opinion and changing their minds on things if they don't do it. I think you'd agree with me, because that's why you're proposing responding, because you see it's a worthwhile exercise that actually the government may listen, adapt and change. But I feel the tenor of what we're saying in terms of when it came to space and also the sort of living conditions in respect of the amount of light that is allowed in, I think we need to be more positive on that. There was an acknowledgement of that, and then there was, oh, but the government could do more. I think we've got to accept it. We're talking about a permitted development standard, but we probably have to increase the space standards as a whole first, and then and bring the permitted development space standards up at the same time. But this is addressing a loophole that exists in the system that we've all been frustrated about in the system. And maybe just to get more balance in this, the government needs a bit more of a pat on the back for that idea, to say thank you very much. And the reason I say that is there might be some developers who are arguing the other side, get rid of this one, and you don't know what will come out of the compromise, or you don't know what will come out of the listening process. So I think it's very important to strongly support an idea that we like, while maybe going harder on ones that we don't. So this is where my caution is being exercised here. I think we're all a bit scared by what's being suggested, but I also think we have to acknowledge some of the, not evidence, you say there isn't evidence, but acknowledge some of the motivation behind it. We do know that the high streets are struggling. We are looking at it from a Basildon prism in terms of what we want to do with our own town centre. We're in a fortunate position in some ways that we're able to leverage finance to do these sorts of things. Other councils have gone bust, Labour Croydon for one. So it's, you know, we have to respect that actually sometimes you have to allow many flowers to bloom to actually, and that there might be private solutions to actually come in and actually help a high street in other areas where they don't have the same ability to regenerate their town centre as we would do. So it's an acknowledgement of the problem being set in respect of the changes that are happening in terms of retail that have been accelerated by this pandemic, and also an acknowledgement of actually how our hospitality, restaurants sector, some of our service sector have really felt the pain through the unusual circumstances of this pandemic, and many may not recover for a few years, maybe who knows. So I just feel, from my perspective, that we need to be very careful to praise where praise is due, and actually and acknowledge where the problem has been set, but come up with other solutions, and also actually, as you rightly say, use the stick, attack areas there we actually see that there could be significant risk for this council and any plans that we have for regeneration. So I think it's that striking of that balance. And from my perspective, I think it would be a more powerful response and very magnanimous of the chair of SPI, if he was to accept this. I think we need an amendment to this recommendation. And I would propose that actually that any response that we do is actually done in consultation with the chair of SPI and the opposition lead member on this committee, who's my esteemed fellow councillor, Councillor Moore. And that's my proposed amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. I must admit, I'm confused by the points that you raised there on multiple levels. I
appreciate that, but I have also made an amendment.
And I will come to your amendment. I will come to your amendment. But I cannot support any reduction or any balance in something that I think is going to have significant consequences on the residents of this borough. Now, the report welcomes the space standards that have been adopted under PD rights. It does that. It should have done years ago when PD rights first came in. But space standards is only one part and one element of PD rights that is fundamentally wrong. And there can be no doubt that the PD rights has been an absolute disaster of a policy. I will come on to other points that you've raised later on, but you do have an amendment. Do you have a seconder?
Yes, I think I do. Councillor Moore or Councillor Turner, one of the two.
I'll accept Councillor Turner as the only one that's indicated to second your amendment. Is there anybody, any other? Councillor Moore, did you want to come in and speak? We will vote on the amendment before we vote on the full recommendation. Councillor Moore.
Well, do you want to deal with the amendment and then?
I will move to the vote on the amendment. That that the response is just.
Can I speak very briefly on it then? Very briefly.
You can speak very briefly.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, I appreciate the Chair has his views and his opinions, and it came across, and I respect the Chair a lot, and I agree with him on a lot of what he says, but obviously not everything. And I just feel that for the sake of political balance and the position that the officers are putting themselves in responding to the consultation, and also to give it more power and more weight, what better a consultation response if it's accepted by both parties, both sides of the aisle. I think we will have a more powerful response, a more balanced response, and knowing Councillor Moore, he probably agrees with you on most of your concerns and risks. Not much of a diluted response either. And so it would be great if all members could support that amendment. Thank you.
Can I just come back on those points?
Yep.
Yeah, they're reasonable. They're all reasonable comments. I think the fundamental issue is nobody disputes there's a need for housing. The question is really whether this is the way to go about it for the risks that are outlined in the paper. And of course, we can only go on the consultation document itself. So where there are significant gaps really, that will require the government to go away and have a rethink, because again, a number of local authorities are making similar points. Obviously we work for the residents of Basildon. So in that sense, a policy such as this that would risk severely pressurising local infrastructure, potentially reduce the number of school places that are available. And of course, as a nationwide policy, it's not as though there'd be the option of unmet needs being exported outside of the borough or across the county, because everywhere would be struggling with this. It would be very, very difficult to really resist it, because the only tool that's presently available is Article 4s, although the level of evidence that is required now to justify that large-scale blanket exemption is significant. So again, if there are areas where this can be toned down slightly, that may be the case. But the issue here is actually it's actually the proposed right itself, and the issue it causes. Presently, these risks are not there. So the issue is actually the right itself.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. Councillor Moore, your reference within the amendment, do you wish to come in on this point?
No, I'm happy to wait till after the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Turner.
I don't want to speak on the amendment. Do you want to speak now on the general report?
I'm happy for you to speak now on the general
okay.
report. Yeah.
I think first of all, I'd thank the officer for what was more than a summary. It was a briefing, and and you know, we're forming opinions in our mind, but I think you spelled it out so eloquently and so thoroughly. I don't know if you missed anything. I wouldn't know. But thank you.
I'm very touched.
But thank you for that. It was, I sat here patiently listening. I didn't nod off because it was so intriguing. But I think what you've said basically reinforces the views that certainly myself have come to, but it sounds like other members that have spoken. It's not a good idea, but let's not condemn. This is actually about going out on consultation. Normally, I would say we should go and consult, because there's a difference between an authority sending back their view without any weight from the community. You know, that you get the weight of the community behind you, and then you write back to government, whatever government, and tell them your views. It carries a lot more weight. But I can't imagine, can you, a government, any government sitting there not knowing what the downsides are to these proposals? And like Councillor Rimmer said, I wouldn't criticise a government for going out on consultation. However, plain sort of to see the downfalls and the pitfalls in this. And you've got to remember, while it might not be good for us, there may be a council out there somewhere out there that says, what a brilliant idea, we should go with this. But I think the government are looking for genuine responses, and we can give them that. I did the same on waste many years ago, knowing exactly what a contentious issue waste was. We went out on consultation. Guess what? That consultation basically crucified us, and it put to rest any schemes, any ill-advised schemes on waste that anybody had. It killed it. And maybe, just maybe, this is what the government are doing. Perhaps they're getting lobbied, they're getting policies being driven, and they want to see what the appetite is. I am disappointed we can't go out with consultation. I understand why. The timing constraints and circumstances with COVID wouldn't support that. So on this occasion, I will be supporting, along with the other two councillors from the Conservative group. But again, thank you for the full and enlightening response on your briefing. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Mr. David, do you wish to come back on it?
Yeah, I just want to say, thank you, Councillor Turner. I think certainly from past experience of working in London, it appears to have been drafted with places like Harrow and East London in mind, where some of the local and district centres there are basically units along residential streets where the ground floors have been converted, and in such instances, then the original use of the properties was residential, so there'll be little or no impact there. The problem is, of course, not everywhere is London. It goes without saying. So the circumstances in other significant medium-sized towns and cities around the country are very, very different. But it also the policy itself, or the proposed right, it doesn't distinguish between the main town and city centres and then the smaller district level centres, and that's the fundamental problem, really. Not to mention, of course, the possible impacts elsewhere, away from town centres.
Thank you,
Yes,
Mr.
thank
Davey.
you.
We'll now go to the vote on the amendment, which, just to paraphrase Councillor Rimmer, if you could just give me a nod if I've got this right, that the consultation will be in agreement with the chair of SPNI and Councillor Moore as the opposition spokesperson for SPNI. Councillor Moore, I hold you in the highest regard, but I cannot support the amendment and will be voting against. Councillor Fellows.
Against.
Councillor Reid.
Against.
Councillor Rimmer.
For.
Councillor Moore.
For.
Councillor Turner.
For.
3 votes in favour, 3 votes against. With my casting vote, that has not been carried. Are there any other members that wish to? Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If I could say that it would have been useful to include a copy of the consultation in the agenda pack, that it would have certainly helped with the response at the enclosure. it also would have been useful to know in the body of the report that the consultation closes 1 week from today. So we have very little opportunity to change very much. However, I do think it is important that the council responds to this particular consultation. And as the planning officer said, it's important that we emphasise that the proposals will encourage town centre landlords to convert their properties to residential use, detracting from the vitality and vibrancy of successful town centres wherever they are. And I'm concerned that the proposals could stifle regeneration efforts. And obviously there is a danger that councils would be unable to control piecemeal development, and our high streets may, in the worst case, disappear and be replaced by housing. So as mentioned, however, the proposals are not limited to just high streets and could occur to other locations such as retail parks, local shopping centres, and business parks and so on. So I was therefore very supportive of item 1441 in the conclusion section of the report in enclosure 2. And I'm very concerned on the potential loss of developer contributions to provide the necessary infrastructure for our borough. And this needs to be strongly made in the council's response. I'm also concerned how these proposals impact the government's planning the future white paper. I thought proposals that I looked at in the white paper was to reduce complexity in the planning system, to monitor on design quality and so-called beauty, and improve energy standards, and most importantly, greater local engagement and transparency in planning. And I'm not sure the changes proposed in this consultation would tick those boxes. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Any other members wishing to address the committee? In which case I'll sum up, and many of you will have listened to me tonight and have seen the report and know my views that if this proposal comes to fruition, it will seek to further erode the planning policy process that we've seen. It significantly, as Councillor Fellows has said, and as Councillor Moore has just said as well, leaves more questions than it does answers around infrastructure. And it could lead to significant job losses in sectors in different areas across the borough. And as Mr. Davies said, from a practical point of view, it leaves a significant challenge around ROAN figures as well. So this proposal, I hope, doesn't go anywhere. And I think we have to send the strongest possible message to the government that it's time to go back and think again, because it doesn't work. This one-size-fits-all type approach doesn't work, and it certainly won't work here. So with that, I'll move to the recommendation on page 78, that the committee agrees with officers that the proposal should not be supported and that response should be provided to the consultation for the reasons stated both in this report and in the briefing note. And I'll be voting in favour. Councillor Fellows.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Rimmer.
In favour.
Councillor Moore.
In favour.
Councillor Reid.
In favour.
Councillor Turner.
In favour.
Thank you. And with that, that concludes our agenda this evening. So I'd like to thank all members for your attendance. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.